Thank you for joining us for this special virtual conversation. Let's talk about mental health, the Global Awareness Challenge. The live event will begin in 5 minutes. However, before we get started, we'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, when the live event begins, we will open the question and answer box. We ask that you submit questions as they come to mind as we proceed through the panel discussion. Now, to access the question and answer session, please look at the slide currently showing on your screen. You should see a question mark icon under the green arrow. You will need to locate that icon at the top of your screen and click on it. Once you're in the Q&A box, you'll see two choices, featured and my questions at the top. To view all published questions, you should select featured. Now, please note, if you're using a mobile device, Microsoft Teams may minimize the presentation view so that you have a larger view of the Q&A box. Your microphones will remain muted throughout the panel, and this virtual conversation is being recorded. Thank you again for attending today's special virtual conversation. Let's talk about mental health, the Global Awareness Challenge. This event boasts a panel with diverse experiences to include mental health practitioners, educators, advocates, researchers, and medical and mental health care providers. If you look at the slide on your screen, you will see who the NDSP serves, including the total number of students and duty locations. As you are aware, our students typically attend home study programs, international schools, or boarding schools. And oftentimes, due to the isolation of their geographic locations at places such as U.S. embassies, consulates, remote military installations, both U.S. and foreign, students sometimes go a long period of time with limited interactions with peers or family, and this is especially true if they're in home study or boarding school environments. Now, due to this factor and other risk factors coupled with current crucial mental health topics, we felt that it was important to provide our families and stakeholders with the information we'll discuss here today. The overarching purpose is awareness, and that's reflected in the name. We call it a global challenge because our families are located internationally. However, the challenge comes with understanding and applying what you learn here to your everyday lives moving forward. At the end of today's event, we will consider you all ambassadors who are armed with knowledge that can actually save lives. Now, at the conclusion of our panel discussion today, you should be able to identify risk factors that military-connected students in remote locations may encounter that make them susceptible to depression. You'll understand current mental health climate among our students. You'll recognize and possibly be able to respond to the signs and symptoms of depression and suicide ideation. You'll understand differences between depression and the blues. And you'll understand a little better the parameters of Tricare mental health coverage. And then you'll gain insight on locating resources and also possibly initiating mental health care services. So we have a robust discussion ahead of us. And while you may not remember everything that you hear here today, just know that your mental health knowledge base would either increase or be refreshed. Now we're going to talk with today's panelists. I am Dr. Shanna Smalls, and I'll be the moderator and producer for today's event. I do ask that you give me grace as I work through everything that we are doing. Now, I am the education program specialist for the non-DoD school program, and I'm stationed at DoDEA's headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia. Now I'm going to introduce you to our esteemed panelists. Each of them will tell you a little about themselves and the work that they do. We're going to start with Dr. Kristen Hall.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here and for offering me the opportunity to be here today. As was just said, my name is Dr. Kristen Hall, and I'm an associate professor in the school psychology program at Penn State University. But by trade, I'm a school and clinical psychologist. I still continue to work with clients ranging in age from, 8 years old all the way up to 58 years old. So I still continue to see a wide range of folks. And I've also worked with DoDEA now since 2016, helping both on the NDSP side as well as on the DoDEA side related to the prevention and intervention related to self-harm and suicide, problematic sexual behavior, and now multi-tiered systems of support for social emotional adjustment. So I'm happy to be here and happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Dr. Sean Truman will be unable to join us today. However, I'm proud to highlight that he's working with Tricare leadership to hopefully provide additional options for remote quality mental health care for our constituents through his organization, the Truman Group. Now, the Truman Group currently serves the Department of State staff and families stationed in the same locations where we have NDSP families. So I felt that that was important to highlight. Now we're going to go to Miss Kathy Williams.
Okay, I'm trying.
Okay, I think she's having a little technical difficulty. There you go. We can hear you.
You can hear me now? Okay,
yes,
we can. Okay, good. Okay, I'm Kathy Williams. I'm from Durham, North Carolina. I am a retired educator of 31 years in the Durham Public Schools. I did teach for a good little minute and retired as a high school guidance counselor. I am a community advocate for mental health and mental illness. And in 1996, after the suicide of my son, I started an awareness presentation on identifying depression and suicide prevention and entitled it Breaking the Silence. And I've received numerous trainings in mental health awareness and suicide prevention. I facilitate workshops for schools, religious communities, groups, conferences, wherever. I've told folk I'll come into your home if I need to. And so, so I work to help local communities understand depression and to come to grips with the tragedy of suicide. I've also served about 15 years as a community partner with Dr. Alfie Breland Noble, founder and CEO of the ACOMA Project. And I also serve as a member of the advisory board for the ACOMA Project. Now, the ACOMA Project seeks to raise consciousness, empower people, and change systems and ensure that they are built to respond to the needs of youth of color and their communities. So I'm grateful for the work that I have to do, and I'm grateful to be here with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Now we're going to go to Rosalind Wiseman.
All right. Hi, everybody. I am speaking to you from northern Spain, surrounded by the mountains, and I am the co-founder of Cultures of Dignity. We specialize in the social emotional learning of young people by listening to young people, and then we act often as a bridge between young people to the people that care for them. I also have written extensively articles and books, and the one that I'm most known for is pretty much two books, Queen Bees and Wannabes, that was turned into the movie Mean Girls, and Masterminds and Wingmen. And both books were very much an understanding of the social dynamics of young people and how it impacts their sense of self. And both books, like everything we do, we are listening, like Kathy was saying, about listening to young people so that we can really make sure that what we're doing is what they need. So likewise, I have spent a tremendous amount of time working with international school students, listening to them about the unique challenges that they have as they move from culture to culture or from school to school. And that there are these unique benefits, but unique challenges for this demographic of young people in these communities. I also have, I continue to write. I have a book coming out, my first book that I have co-written with a dear friend and colleague of many, many years named Shantara McBride, who, and we have written a book called Courageous Discomfort, How to Have Brave, Life-Changing Conversations About Race and Racism, where we took the 20 questions that people have asked us the most, the ones they want to ask or the ones they do ask. And then we've taken from a social emotional learning lens, for those of you, I think there's a lot of you who are on this call that know this, that understanding emotions and then understanding the tactics of social emotional learning is often, unfortunately, what is missing from conversations around diversity and equity and how people emotionally respond to those conversations that may shut them down or may make them try and dominate a conversation. So we have a book coming out in September, and we both are teachers, at our base. And so if you read the book, you'll know that there are two teachers who wrote the book because we're so focused on presenting things that work, listening to people, and then giving them suggestions for how we can maybe move a little bit better and have conversations that are so hard for us. So that is that's the experience and the observations that I'm going to be bringing today to our talk and to our time together.
Thank you so much, Rosalind. That's awesome. And now we have Miss Jane Yaws. Jane, I think you're muted. There you go.
Actually, it still shows I'm muted, but can you hear me?
We can.
That button is not working very well today. I am currently serving as the nurse consultant for the Tricare area, responsible for Europe, Africa, and Southwest Asia. Both my father and my husband were on active duty, so I have been both a active duty family member as a child and as a wife. And I also served a career as an Army Nurse Corps officer. So I have extensive experience in the military environment. Currently, I am working in the Tricare office for the last 7 years, and I'm very passionate about the care of our beneficiaries. And that's why I'm here, is to help you.
Well, we greatly appreciate you being here, and we appreciate everyone else being here also. I told the audience that you all were esteemed, and I think they can see for themselves that you really are. So we really do appreciate your participation. So now we're actually going to start the panel discussion. And during this portion, questions will be posed to you, the panelists, and then you can provide your unique perspectives when you answer. Okay, so we're going to start with Roslyn. The first question is, what is the overall current state of mental health among children and young adults? And Rosalind, in your answer, may you include information that you think students would want their parents to be aware of?
Well, first of all, I'll start, but I mean, this panel knows, I'm sure, has a lot of really important things that, to add to whatever I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the other part of that, I think, is that I'm going to give my perspective, but I think the most important is to ask the young people that you work with. I work with a lot of international school students, but it doesn't mean that I know your kids.
Correct.
And or you, if you're a young person listening to this. So I'm going to give you what I think is the landscape, and then I think what's most important, and I think the reason why we're having this this time together is to be able to create momentum for when this is over, that the conversation continues in ways that make sense the most for you all in the context and the communities that you're living in. In preparation for today, I was thinking about it, and here's some things that I came up with. There's overall, we know that there are statistics that show that young people in some ways are struggling more than they were before. And when the CDC did those statistics in 2019, we were looking at significantly more, excuse me, I just lost my word. Significant more problems with mental health in a variety of areas for young people. But I want to stay away from the statistics actually right away, because I think that sometimes we get so onto the statistics that we lose sight of like what are young people saying. And I think that there are young people that are really struggling, and there are some young people that are not. I think in general that young people have been struggling more last several years. And so I wrote down some things that beyond the statistics that would hopefully be helpful today. One is, I think young people, when they do have mental health challenges, that they don't want to add to anyone's burden, and that means a teacher, a parent, or a friend, because they think that and understandably so, they think that everybody else is struggling. I had a conversation with a 19-year-old person yesterday, a college intern of mine who is working with another college intern who's 18, and the 18-year-old just got COVID or is getting over it. The 19-year-old is trying to pick up what the other one's doing. He's also exhausted, some mental health challenges herself. And so it really brought home, I'd already written that down for you all today. I really think there's a thing about not wanting to add to somebody's burden, which is one of the reasons why I think one of the positives is that for a lot of kids, the mental health stigma is not as a feeling of anger. A question that I think is a really important question to ask, to answer this question for the young people that you work with, is when is it okay not to be okay? That's the question I think is important to ask, is when is it okay not to be okay? And meaning, when is it okay to ask for help? And then who would you ask for help? And then the third part, and I'd like to open it to my, other people, is that I think young people are still managing the expectations of others and themselves, even more so post-pandemic, to like keep up or figure out how to move forward. And so they know that it's unreasonable in some ways, but they're still holding on to these unreasonable expectations for themselves. So that's in general what I think young people are telling me, at least, about what their experiences are.
Okay. Now, would anyone else like to contribute to that question? Okay, I think Rosalind did a fantastic job of answering it. All right, we're going to move to the second question. Now, I'm going to ask Kathy to take the lead on this one. What are some signs and symptoms parents should be aware of to help determine if their child may be suffering from depression or even having suicide ideations? And Kathy, when you answer, may you kind of include the differences between depression and the blues?
Okay. All right. Okay. And I wrote down a few things. I want to say first, a good rule of thumb is first to kind of figure out if the child is suffering from a typical blues or moodiness, or is it something that looks a little more than that? And even as a parent myself, I had to learn that what I saw was not typical teenage behavior, which was what I saw in my child before his death. And when I go back, I see that and believe that he was suffering with depression. And I always say to parents, and I like this forum, I like when I have to go out, because it was something that I didn't have, did not know. And then a lot of parents do think, oh, that's just typical teenage behavior. So there is a difference, and there are some things that we have to look at when we see it to determine the difference. First is how long? How long has these emotions and behavior changes been going on? And then how strong is it? Because when one suffers with depression, it's a little bit more intense than what sadness may be, or just the regular blues from not passing a test. And then how much or how long this has been going on. So for an example, if your child is moody and kind of feeling down, but they're still kind of doing what they normally would do on a daily basis, then it's probably just a bad mood. But if that feeling down and moody has been going on for, say, 2 weeks or more, and every day, and other behaviors are going on as well, then it's probably time to seek help. And I always tell parents, when we go through the common signs of depression that we see in our youth, they have to be in a cluster. It just cannot be just one thing going on, appetite change or sleep disruptions or whatever. At least 5, and those 5 signs or symptoms have been going on for 2 or more weeks, then I would say that it's probably time to seek help for your child, and it's not just the normal blues. And some of the signs and symptoms that we could look for could be increased or persistent irritability. And I know we see that in teenagers sometimes, or even youth, and we like, well, why are they so irritable? And sometimes it could be normal, and then sometimes not. But if it's been going on for a period of time and it seems to be strong and not getting better, then it is something to have a conversation about and to look at. Sometimes changes in sleep habits or appetite. We know our teenage boys especially love to eat. And, when you see that change, or when you see that they're not getting the proper amount of rest, or even sleeping more or sleeping less, they're feeling hopeless. They have a hopeless attitude, gloomy moods that continue for 2 weeks without any improvement. lack of motivation or energy. And I tell parents sometimes you say, oh, they're just lazy. Not necessarily so, because when one is depressed, they don't have the energy to do what they would love to do, or hang out with their friends, or go out and play basketball, or do the things that they enjoy doing. Dramatic changes in their grooming, may not feel like taking a shower or a bath, or may not feel like combing the hair, things like that. Abrupt changes in behavior, such as withdrawing from activities that they normally like to do, withdrawing from friends. I remember telling some students would tell me, I don't like going in the cafeteria. They don't like being around people as much. And it's a change. When it's a change, low self-esteem or suicidal thoughts, spending more time alone than usual, going to the room, not wanting to spend time with family. And it has to be changes. Usually, sometimes it may be impulsive behavior. They may have fits of crying. And these are behaviors that's been going on daily for more than 2 weeks or more. And it's kind of like in a cluster. You will see more than one behavior. And so I would say that depression in youth is not like everyday sadness or moodiness. And it's so intense, and it's painful, and it's very, very painful. So those are some of the signs and symptoms. And the main thing, if it's been going on for a period of time, and if it seems, kind of strong or intense.
Okay. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have anything to add to that before we move to the next question? Okay. Chrissy?
I do. Oh, sorry. Go. No, Christy, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I just wanted to echo what Kathy shared. I mean, she did such a lovely job of really walking through, the things that we should be looking for. But to add to that, I think there's two things that I like to tell parents and others as well to look for. So the first thing is I like to think about what I call the 3 Ps. Is it persistent? So, again, that longer than 2 weeks, this just doesn't, this just didn't happen the other day, right? This is going on for a little while. Is it persistent? Is it pervasive? So is it not just at school? It's not just about home. It's not about one environment. It's across multiple environments. So is it pervasive across different aspects of the person's life? And then impairing, I know that doesn't start with a P, but it has a P in it, so I count it, right? So is it impairing? And to Kathy's point again, like, is it getting in the business of your teenager doing teenager things? Hanging out with friends, eating and sleeping, I think, are the top 3 that you can look at as just really quick ways to know, is this a problem? So I like that idea of the 3 Ps because it helps us to kind of remember, here are the things that we're looking for. The other thing I'd like to point out is I do think that it's common for people to say things like, well, is this just for attention? Is this just for attention? And then the end of, important, aspects of the student's life, if they've experienced a breakup, if they're being picked on, if they're no longer friends with their friends anymore, as adults, it's easy for us to look back and say, you're not even going to care in 2 years, kiddo. This is nothing, right? But for them, it's very real. And so I would really caution people as well to not necessarily assume that that kids are doing things for attention, or that they're being overly dramatic, or that's girl drama, right? Like that sort of thing. Because the fact of the matter is that maybe it's not. And whether it seems real for us, it's real for them. So those are just the 2 things I wanted to add along to what Kathy had already shared.
Okay, thank you. Roslyn?
Well, yeah, and what I wanted to add on to that, I think it's the build of all of the things that have all the great things that are really important things that have been said, is that I think sometimes it manifests in parents getting angry at their kids or being in conflict. with their children, because as Kathy said, you know, if they're lazy, that means they're not doing the things they're supposed to do, like the chores around the house or the homework or, you know, whatever it is. And so very easily there with a depressed child, it becomes also there's conflicts between the parent about being really and understandably so frustrated because the kid is forgetting things or losing things or, you know, just making sort of life in the family more difficult. And it's and so the parent can get really, really frustrated. And so I just want to emphasize what Kathy said about, you know, when you're having those moments of thinking, oh, this kid's being so lazy, that it's just a moment to pause and think about the larger context. Look at me, Kristen said about those 3 Ps, right? And what Kathy said, because I think that parents can react sometimes with so much frustration that it tends to make it a little bit harder for the child to reach out for help when things have been in conflict with the parent.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to move on to our next question. And I'm going to pose this to Chrissy because she's had extensive experience working with DoDEA for the last few years. Now, what are some additional risk factors that military-connected students and possibly NDSP students in remote locations encounter that can make them at risk for depression?
Thanks. That's an excellent question. And my answer is going to sound a little bit boring, but it's really as simple as lots of transitions and absence of parents. I mean, those are the 2 big ones, right? And what I'd like to comment on that is I think that sometimes people think, well, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? So these kids are resilient and they've moved 8 times before. Why would this one be any different? Well, at the end of the day, maybe the 9th move is the final move, right? That's the one where kiddo is just like, I've hit my limit, right? And they might have a harder time trying to adjust to the shift in the relationships that they have with their teachers, with their peers, and their neighborhoods, that sort of thing. And the absence of parents. Like I think with teenagers in particular, we kind of think, oh, they don't even really want to see us anyways, but they do. And when their mom or their dad or other or other important person isn't around because, you know, they're overseas, they're TDY, they're deployed, they're in training, they're right. Those things are challenging and they add up over time, right? So I don't want to sound alarmist in the sense that I can't tell you that there's a magic number. After X moves, this is when it really, you know, has that hard-hitting impact. I don't think it's as easy as that to quantify it. But I do think that it's important to recognize that even if kiddos are pretty adept at having to manage these kinds of challenges, it might take its toll over time. One of the things that I also like to speak to is this idea of resiliency, right? And my students actually in school psychology tease me because they know that I'm not a fan of what I call the R word in terms of resiliency, because I think sometimes we think of it like it's this inherent trait to the kiddo, right? Like you're either resilient, which means that you're strong, you're being a trooper, you're making the best of things, right? All this kind of stuff, or you're not. Well, the fact of the matter is that I think that resiliency is something that we can cultivate. I think that it exists. I think that it's an important thing to consider. But I don't think it's a character flaw if a kiddo is not super resilient after a move, after an absence, after some, you know, issue that's come up for them. And so again, it goes back to this idea of, you know, if you've been through hard things a lot of times, does that make you stronger? Sometimes it can, right? It absolutely can, because we would hope that kiddos along the way would be learning how to cope, would be learning how to find the words to talk about what's hard and to talk about how to move, how to move through the challenges that they're experiencing. But sometimes they aren't learning the skills and they aren't learning to cope, and they don't really feel like they can share that with the adults around them because they don't want to be a burden, right? They don't want to be, they don't want to complain. They don't want to be that kid, right? And so sometimes one of the things I like to talk to people about, in particular when you work in schools, is when you have that kiddo that's gone through something really hard and they're showing up to school on time and their homework is done and they have a smile on their face, and all the adults around them, right, are like, look at that kid's so resilient. He's been through all this stuff and look at how he's coping. And it's like, give it time. Because I wonder if in 2, 4, 5, 6 years, if we're going to have a really upset kid who's suffering in silence, right? But they've learned and they've been rewarded for being the resilient kid, right? So actually, sometimes our kids that come to school a hot mess, those are the kids I'm less worried about, because we know that they're a hot mess and we can do something to help, right? We can step in and say, hey, kiddo, what's going on? Like, how can we help? Like, what's happening for you? But the kid that shows up with their homework done and their hair's combed and they're smiling and their teeth are brushed, right? And they're the ones kind of helping to take care of mom and helping to take care of the other kids in the home. They're the kiddo that might get missed because they're showing on the outside that everything's okay, and we can't be certain that it is unless we ask them. So I think that for our military connected students, I don't think that we need to over pathologize what they experience, because I think for many of them, they handle it just fine. They learn how to talk about it. They learn how to get the help that they need. The adults around them are able to help them talk about what's hard. Yet I do think it's important to recognize that even if it seems normal for this particular kiddo, this is the only life they've ever known. They've always moved. Why would this move be any different? I just think it's important that we keep in mind that sometimes that everybody has a limit. Everyone has a limit, even if they're talking about stuff, and even if they're in sports, and even if they comb their hair. So I just think that those are the things that we need to be thoughtful of, transitions, because humans are social animals, right? We need people. We need to know that there are people around us who care about us. We need to know who we can go to when we need help. And when students have to go through a lot of transitions, it can make it harder for them to know who to go to and how to readjust. So those are the main things that I would probably list as things to keep in mind for our kiddos who are in our schools that have a parent in the military.
Okay, thank you. We have like 2 minutes, and if someone wants to contribute to this particular question. All right, we will move forward to the next one. Okay, so question 4, I'm going to ask Jane to step in here. We want to ask, how does Tricare, which is the insurance company or insurance plan that military connected folks have, how it helps families who need to seek mental health treatment for their children? And then as a follow-up question, I would wonder if telehealth appointments are authorized for families assigned to remote locations. So, Jane?
Since my mute button is not working, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So the first thing that a family should do when they're seeking mental health care is to contact their primary care manager, which for remote beneficiaries is International SOS. Okay. International SOS will gather the information from the family, and the first place they will look for help is in the network. Now, the networks are extremely limited because we don't have many providers overseas who speak fluent English and understand the American way of life. So we have robust networks in certain places, and the others we don't have any network services. But that's what we'll try first. Then sometimes word of mouth works. If we don't have networks at your location, but families talk with one another and they may be seeking assistance from a non-network provider, the family should ask if they can go to see that non-network provider, if that's somebody that they would like to try. So we also have a possibility of non-network care. The third thing we look at is telehealth, but I'm going to tell you the Tricare policy for telehealth first, and then tell you how we access that particular benefit. So the Tricare policy states that the person providing telehealth services must be licensed and carry malpractice insurance where they are physically located and where the patient or the beneficiary or the child is physically located. Now think about that. If you're in Africa or Eastern Europe, the likelihood of an American provider in the United States being licensed and privileged in that country is not very high. So we can't use CONUS providers for our typical remote locations, with one exception, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We can use telehealth providers within a country. So within, for example, Germany or within the United Kingdom, we are using telebehavioral health services for our children because those providers are already licensed in that country and already have malpractice insurance. But the countries overseas, particularly in Eurasia, Africa, they don't have what's called reciprocity across country lines. So those providers in the UK or in Germany aren't going to cross over into another country and provide telehealth services. And we can't use the ones in the United States. So you can see that telehealth is very limited, except the one exception is at US embassies. If the child is physically located on the soil of the US embassy, they can use providers from the United States. Those providers have to be network providers under the contractor that they work for Tricare in the United States, which would be Humana or HealthNet. So if they're network providers in CONUS or in the United States, and the child's on embassy soil, there is a way to do telehealth if that provider agrees to do that. We also have regional medical officers, psychiatrists, who are Department of State employees, who sometimes are willing to provide services to the children. But that is not an automatic service that they can do. Sometimes they have capacity, sometimes they don't. A number of our families believe that if they come over here, that they can access care at a military treatment facility, but that's almost impossible because we don't have enough providers at our military treatment facilities for their enrolled population. So in most cases, they will refuse to see the children. You also have to think about age for telehealth. Young children usually are not good candidates for telehealth. Sometimes the adolescents can work better with that if you can find a provider who will accept the child for telehealth, because some providers won't do that as well. So we look at network, we look at non-network, we look at if telehealth is even available. On rare occasions, we might be able to do a little telehealth with a military hospital, but I would not count on that if you're coming overseas. And then a number of our families just have to, military one source is a good place. If the child's having maybe adjustment disorders, moving to a new place, just needs to talk to some other children who are also moving around a lot. There is some help in the military one source, but this is a significant area of need overseas, just due to lack of services. But we do everything we can to try and help the family before we look at the alternative of moving back to the United States.
Wow, thank you so much. That's some great knowledge. I just learned some things that I can share with families if they inquire. So, thank you for that extended response and including everything that you did. Does anyone else want to contribute to this question? All right, we're going to move forward.
I mean, I have more questions, and I have more questions hearing that. I'm wondering, is that okay if I ask my fellow panelists about some questions based on what we just heard?
Oh, most definitely, it's fine. We just have about under 3 minutes to kind of talk about this question, but you all can go ahead and share.
Okay.
And yep.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just, because it's so hard, I'm just wondering about if people, the people on the panel, what experiences they've had helping families who are in this situation where they're trying to find help. They're struggling to find anybody who has space for them, who has the ability to do it, maybe even has like a specialty in or does work with young people. And I would love to hear from other people, from some people who are working, I'm more in the social dynamics of young people, and young people come and talk to me about the problems that they're having. I sometimes will refer them to Sean, to the Truman Group. But I would love to hear some things, because I know how frustrated parents can get when they try and get help and then they can, and it's their kids that they feel like that they're not helping. So that's just like, what are some workarounds that people have used?
And I'm glad before someone else answers that you mentioned the Truman Group. I spoke about them, Sean and his group earlier. They are attempting to establish some partnerships to help fill the gap. What's interesting about his group is that they have licensed therapists for the different countries. And so they are able to fill gaps. I know that they were declining services with younger children, but he's looking to bring people on who specialize in like elementary level and pre-K level students as well. So I know that that is one thing that's happening, but in coordinating this event and talking with everyone, learned that this is definitely a gap that exists within our communities and them seeking care. Does anyone else have anything to share? Okay, Kristen.
Yeah, so I used to do research in telehealth, and pre-COVID, everyone thought I was crazy and said, gosh, I just don't know. And then COVID hit, and I guess I wasn't so crazy anymore, was I? And the good news is that, sorry, I have a little bit of a moment when I think back on that. But I mean, the good news is that the research really shows that telehealth is just as good as in-person therapy. For certain populations, it maybe even works a little bit better. But to everybody's point, we do have a service gap in terms of people who work with children, period, in mental health, people who work with children online in mental health. So one of the things that I would really recommend to parents who are in that space where they don't know if they can get help online, they don't know if there's anyone that can work with their child online because of their location, I would really recommend, that you reach out to your family doctor, like talk to, the person who works with your kiddo on the medical side. I also have a list of some parent resources that could be helpful as well, because in particular with our really young kids, like our preschool, early elementary kids, talk therapy at 4 is not really probably the most effective service anyway. So I understand that parents have this idea that if their kiddo has an opportunity to work with, me or, someone who's like me and has my kind of training, that in an hour a week, we're going to magically, kind of work out whatever's going on. When in actuality, it's really more the interactions between the parents and the child that can be really helpful. And so I'd be happy to share at the end of this some helpful options in terms of resources that could at least tide people over in the meantime as well.
Yes, that'll definitely be helpful. Thank you. All right, we're going to move to our next question. Next question. What are some readily available resources that parents can use to help them get more information about mental health for their children? And I think this question is a great follow-up to our to our last question. And this is kind of open to all panelists because you have a different perspective. So everyone has, like a minute that they can present some options or some resources. Is there anyone who wants to go first? Chrissy can
go ahead and talk
Okay.
about the book I was thinking about in particular. So there's a really good book by, her name is Pat Harvey. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She wrote a book called Parenting a Child Who Has Intense Emotions. And basically it's an adaptation of an adult therapy practice called dialectical behavior therapy that's adapted for parents, so that they can use some of the same kinds of techniques in helping their kiddos who have really big feelings, right? And so I've used that with a number of parents that I've had an opportunity to work with, and I like it because it's parent friendly. So that would be one of the options that I was kind of mentioning before.
Awesome. Okay, we'll add that to our list of resources that we're going to include on our website. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to recommend?
I'll go ahead and hop in one more time.
Okay.
So parents don't like it when I say this to them, and I understand why. But actually, one of the most important things you can do is learn how to regulate your own emotions as a parent, right? And getting the help that you might potentially need to deal with your own strong feelings. Because at the end of the day, your kids are looking to you. They're looking at how you cope when things get difficult. Do you get silent? Do you get moody? Do you get grouchy? Right? And so, you know, and to be clear, this isn't like a trying to place the blame on parents when their kiddos have issues with their emotions. We all have challenges, right? But the stress that comes from having a kiddo who's really struggling, how that has an impact on you as a parent, you need support as well. And in your own capacity for learning how to talk through things that are hard, it can be helpful for your kiddos as well. So that's another thing that I would offer is that, you know, if you're not able to necessarily get help for your child, if you're able to get help for yourself, that's a really important step forward so that you have the capacity to be able to help your child as much as you can.
Awesome. That is definitely important.
We have at Cultures of Dignity, we have a resource, right, very much based on what Kristen was just talking about, called the Tiny Guides.
Mhm.
And they are very, very user-friendly for both parents and children about what emotions are. And so things like anger, frustration points, emotional hijacking, there's one on boundaries, but that's really good, emotional granularity, so that you know, when a child says, I'm so angry or I'm so stressed, that you can go, there's an exercise you can go through that's very easy that increases children's emotional intelligence and also gets them more clear about what they're feeling and why. So there's 18 of them, and they're really the components of understanding emotions. And so, yeah, I would say I could not agree more that times we go straight to like talking without or like, you know, tell us all of the things you're feeling without first talking about, well, this is what it feels like when we talk about these things. So at my organization, at Cultures of Dignity, there's a resource called Tiny Guides, and you can use them as either printed or PDFs that you can use with kids or with faculty and parents.
Awesome. I'll add that to our resources as well, Rosalind. Okay. Now we're wrapping up our panel. It was very robust. I learned a lot, you know, and it was just good to hear what everyone had to say. Now, does anyone have any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience before we move on to our Q&A session? Okay, Kathy. I think you're muted, Kathy.
I thought I unmuted.
Okay, no problem.
Wait a minute, hold on.
We hear you now. We can hear you.
Okay. Okay. You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. It's kind of delayed. But I was gonna say, as a parent, as a mother, who at first did not know the signs and symptoms of depression, I would like to ask the parents and say to the parent, learn those signs, know what they are, and know when they are intense and how long they are lasting with your child, because that was something I did not know. So a good resource may be to put on your website those signs and symptoms of depression and suicide. So I think that would be important.
Definitely.
for parents to learn what they are.
Okay, as good as done. Okay, does anyone else have any final thoughts they'd like to share? All right, Chrissy.
I would also, this is just kind of a general reminder, right? Is remember that your kids do not have fully formed frontal lobes until they are 25 years old. Okay, so your frontal lobes are the part of your brain that help you plan, execute plans, regulate your feelings, solve problems, right? Like all that working and playing well with others and like getting your homework done and all that kind of stuff. That is an ongoing skill and an ongoing set of capacities that they're working on. And ultimately, at the end of the day, our role as adults in kids' lives, whether it's as teachers, as parents, right, is we are their frontal lobes, for lack of a better expression. We are their frontal lobes until they have their own frontal lobes, right? And so I think it's just helpful for people to remember that, you know, there is no cure for kids being 4. Sometimes they're just being 4. Sometimes they're just being 12, right? And I roll as part of their job for being 12 right now, right? But again, if we're able to discriminate between when do we have a real problem, those 3 Ps, all the points that Kathy raised about these are the signs and symptoms that you want to look for. When are we in that space versus when are kids just trying to go about the business of learning how to be humans, right? And learning how to get through things that are hard. And so I think when we remember and we put it into context that your child's frontal lobes are not fully cooked, if you will, until they're 24. So 7 years after they're able to vote and die for their country, right? Like sometimes I put that into perspective and I'm like, wow, right? I think it's just an important thing to keep in mind in terms of helping us to have more reasonable expectations of our kiddos and how they cope with the challenges of everyday life, kind of given where they are in their overall their overall sort of life course and life journey.
Oh, that's definitely important because I know that we do often forget and we think that they function on our level when I think that adults are still developing skill sets as we, move through the different stages of life as well. Okay. Now, is there anyone else who has any final thoughts they'd like to share? Okay. Okay, Jane.
I would just like to make one comment to the families. When they need help, I want them to know that they're not alone. They need to call and ask for assistance. And even though it may sound like we didn't have a lot of resources, we will do everything we can to try and find them the help that they need so that they shouldn't sit there and worry about it. Call and ask for help and let us do what we can to help you.
I think that's very important to let them know they're part of a team. It's a care team. So I'm sure that they're grateful to hear that. I want to thank the panelists for everything they've contributed to the panel. We have a few more minutes left, and so we're going to go into the Q&A session if that's okay with everyone on the panel. Is it okay that we proceed with the Q&A session? All right.
Sure.
Yay. Give me just one moment to get in there. And I just want to mention to the participants, if you have any questions and you haven't submitted them, please go ahead and submit them to the Q&A box. And forgive me, our computers are going a little slow this morning, so let's see here. We have one question. This may have been addressed, but are there any distinct differences in the signs and symptoms that parents may see in a child who's considered highly functional? And Kathy, I'm going to send this over to you first, only because, and I didn't share with everyone, I work with Kathy and she mentored me. and got me interested in this mental health space, suicide prevention space, years ago when I was just a youngster. And I moved to Durham, North Carolina from South Carolina. And I just kind of know her story. So I know that, she has quite a bit to say on this. Okay, I think you're muted. Just 1 second. You're still muted.
Yes.
Okay, we can hear you now.
You can, I think it's delayed. Okay. So a child that's highly functional, they mean academically or?
Academically involved in the community. For all intents and purposes, I think that it would be one of the children that maybe Chrissy has talked about when she was presenting, like someone who's just, going about life and, doing everything the way that we expect at a high level. And a lot of times we don't think that those children would be susceptible to depression or, mental health concerns, but they're just, they're functioning. And so,
you're answering that question. And when Kristen talked about it, I could see my child there. Mm-hmm. And if I can just use my child as an example of one who was high functioning, his name was Torian, and Torian was an honor student, took honor classes, was very well liked everyone. He was also a musician, played the saxophone extremely well, had lots of friends. He played football, he played basketball, and he sang in the church choir. He seemed to love everybody, to get along with everybody. And I think, other than us not really knowing all the signs and symptoms of depression, we missed it. We missed it simply because he was doing so well. And we felt like, well, is there a reason for him to be depressed? Of course, I mean, it may come out of nowhere after we learned all of this. But I don't know if I'm answering the question, but yes, those are the students that we need to, as Christy said, really observe those that may be quiet in the back of the room and not saying much. They raise their hand, they give an answer, they're okay, they're not causing any problems. Sometimes those are the children who may be feeling depressed. And what I think, Torian had some a traumatic event to happen in his life at 6 years old when he lost his father. And somehow we think that, the grieving and not getting over his father's death. Torian even had some things in his writings that he got an A on. One was an essay he wrote about the day his father was killed in an automobile accident. And he got an A on that paper, and it said, "Thanks for sharing a personal experience." Yes. And at the end, he said, "I didn't know what death was then. Now I do." And so to me, that was kind of a cry out. After I learned about all of this, to me, that was a cry out. And sometimes I think that's why educators need to know those signs and symptoms, because children will put it in their writings. And if I can quote a poem that Torian wrote in his poetry book, and it was on the last page in his poetry book. The top was colored Carolina blue and the bottom was colored gray. Now listen to this poem. He could write really well. And he said, "Part of me is Carolina blue, full of flavor and excitement, like a wild roller coaster on the loose. But at times I'm mean, dark, black, lonely, and mad at the world, like a lost dog in the desert. Yet they are both true and they are both me." That poem, of course I found out later, but that's an example of how a child may write that may be suffering with depression. or that may be bipolar. And we didn't know that. And that's why I say for parents, it's important to know those signs and symptoms and what you're watching, because after Torian's death, I went to a suicide intervention training, and I'm sitting there checking off the signs of depression and saying, oh, I saw that. I saw that. But all of that I thought was typical teenage behavior. That's what we see in teenagers, not knowing to look at how long this been going on. And to me, it wasn't always negative. It was like moody, irritable, not wanting to get up in the morning, that kind of thing. A little change in eating habits. Didn't know the signs and symptoms. Didn't know, well, how long has this been going on? That kind of thing. I can go on forever and talk about Torian, but he was a high functioning child, very smart. And it just surprised everybody that Torian chose to take his life when we could not see it. I mean, we thought we couldn't see it, but if we knew those signs and symptoms, we would have been able to pick it out and pick it up. So that's what I can say about my high functioning child, and who was doing extremely well in school, church, friends, everything. But there were some things that I did see and did not realize that could have been part of his depression.
And I think that it's important for families to, to hear that, because again, echoing what you and Chrissy said, when you see your child functioning highly, or if you're an outsider looking in and you see someone highly functioning or highly functional, you don't think that anything is wrong with them. And sometimes, they may need help as well. Okay, does anyone else want to contribute? Okay, Chrissy, here you go.
Yeah, and this is another possibly unpopular opinion that'll come out of me today is, this is the importance of things like universal mental health screening in schools. And I know that a lot of people have a lot of hesitation about that. They feel uncomfortable with this idea of school personnel asking these questions. And there's still a lot of myths about, well, if I ask someone if this is an issue for them, then it's going to make them do it, or it's going to give them the idea, or it's going to cause the problem. And the fact of the matter is that we have to get comfortable with asking, like, how are you? Yes. Have things been so bad that you've wanted to die, or you haven't wanted to be here anymore, right? And be able to ask those questions with a straight face. But I think as adults, it's a really uncomfortable thing to do. In my work at the university, I train people how to ask these questions, and I tell them you literally have to practice in front of a mirror and say it until you can say it with a straight face, and you can ask with a straight face. And so to the question that was posed, I think some of it comes down to us being willing to ask the question and to know what to do if we get an answer. That yes, maybe they are in a lot of pain and they do need some help. So this is where I think our schools can be really helpful in terms of not only catching, what happens in art, what happens in students' written work and so forth, like Kathy was sharing with us, but also routinely taking the temperature on kiddos and giving them an opportunity to say, hey, it's getting bad. I'm not feeling so well. I need to talk. Sorry.
And I agree with you, Chrissy. And I know for a fact that those screenings have saved many lives. And I know Kathy can say the same. When I was a school counselor, those screenings, I know several students today who I have been in contact with who said, if we didn't have that conversation, I wouldn't be here today. And so they are very important. Definitely. Let's see, Rosalind, do you have anything to add?
My gosh, I'm just, I'm listening, and yeah, I mean, the thing I would add is that parents do in some ways know their children best, but sometimes maybe this, Kristen, this goes into the unpopular category of saying things. That parents do know their children best, but sometimes we love them so much and they're so close to us that we can't actually see what they need. And I think that there's this thing that's happening where It's this feeling of parents know best for kids, and that's sort of the end of the story. And sometimes it's the people who, that because you're not the parent, you're able to see things a little differently, and you're able to talk to the child a little differently. And that's a really important role for a person to play. And parents, what I'm concerned about is that parents feel like, if parents know best, then there's a flip on that, which is that they're the only ones that should be taking care of these things, or they're the only ones that can. And that's a lot of weight to put on parents. And so, on one side, we sort of say parents are the ones that know best. On the other, we talk about it takes a village to raise a child. And it really does take parents feeling that they can talk to the people, the adults in the community that they trust, that there's nothing to be ashamed of. For example, if their child, if things are rough at home with their kid, that's not anything to be ashamed of, because we're parents and we're all going through this mess. And we all have messy times with our kids sometimes, and it doesn't have to be all on our shoulders. And so I think sometimes this feeling of parents know best is now becoming this thing of, so parents are the only ones who can help, and we can't do it all on our own. We can't. The very fact of sometimes that we are the parents, sometimes we're just too close to it to be able to see it clearly, and we need people who have seen kids over the years, or see that kid in a different light, who's in a different context, who can reach out to that child in a different way. And I think we've got to be really careful to honor the relationship between educators and school counselors and parents together. So it's not all on parents' shoulders. And they're not getting the message that it needs to be all on their shoulders, that they're the ones that have to do everything.
I agree. Okay, Kathy.
Just one last statement. When Christy was talking about schools personnel need to ask the questions, I also feel like when our children go for their physical exams every year, their primary physician should also ask that question, even if the parents are not in the room with them. I think they should check on them as well.
Yeah,
that should be a part of that should be a part of the physical exam, I think.
Exactly. Like Rosalind said, and we all say it takes a village. And so, yeah. Right. I think
we're good at saying it. We're very good at saying it, but we don't we're struggling with the actual doing of it.
I agree.
And we got to. I think we really are seeing, if you can look at it this way, we're really seeing the consequence, the cost of people not being able to talk to each other in the village. And one of the things that happens, that's the cost when people can't talk to each other in the village, is our children get lost. They get lost in the process. They're the cost. They oftentimes are the ones that are really caught. And it's and so I really, really hope people who are listening will see that as like, yeah, or you'll get frustrated at something that happens. I don't think you can be a parent and not go through your child's education or your child's life and not get frustrated sometimes at the other people that are in your child's life. But that doesn't stop, it shouldn't stop us from reaching out and working with each other and saying, okay, like, these are my people, right? These are my people that we're going through this with my kid. I don't know anybody, I'll say to you as a parent of two boys that are 19 and 21, that I 1000% say with confidence that I really would not have been able to get through parenting without the people that sometimes had to give me tough information and that was embarrassing sometimes to me or worrisome to me. And they were the people who gave me the tough information that, I really felt like, even if it was hard to hear, I was going through it with them, and that they really had the best interests of my child when they had their own mental health struggles.
Yeah. And that's important. And I'm just going to end this question with this. In the military community, we're talking about mental health more, but there's still those stigmas, and we didn't talk a lot about stigmas, and we don't have time to go into it, but there are stigmas. And so parents don't want people to think that there's something wrong with their child, because that's a direct reflection of, of them. And then they don't want all the extra that comes with it. So we do have to remember those stigmas. And we see the military, they protect us. They keep our country safe on a day-to-day basis. And so they appear as being macho and having everything together. But that does not mean that, that your child may not need help. Like, everyone needs help in some way or another, at some time or another. So, thank you all for contributing to that question. I think it was a very important one. And we have one more. Can the Truman Group serve other federal civilians who are not with state but are posted at U.S. embassies? And I think the answer to that question is yes. Definitely, but I would have to reach out to Sean just to make sure, but I don't think that they limit who they interact with internationally. All right.
I could be wrong, but I think so too. I think you're right.
Okay, thank you.
I could be wrong, but I think you're right, because I've heard Sean talk about that too.
Yes, I think I did as well. That's why I think I could be pretty confident that they will see people, civilians, federal civilians who are not with the State Department. And that wraps up our Q&A session. I want to again thank the panelists for coming and for sharing this information with our community. I think that everyone on the call gained something valuable from it. And even though I'm a mental health practitioner, I gained something valuable from from it as well. So, you all just provided so much quality information, and I just think that it will make a difference. Even if it just makes a difference with one person, a difference has been made today. And like I challenged our families at the beginning, I think that you all are ambassadors. You can share the information that you've learned. You now know about signs and symptoms, and you can research even further. And as we build out our mental health portion of our website, more and more information will be added, but I'll definitely add the resources that we talked about today so that you can have access, because it's one thing to be aware and have that awareness, then the next component would be how you respond. I would like to ask the parents and the participants, all of our stakeholders who participated today, to actually take the time and complete our evaluation, because it'll let us know how you felt about this event and whether you want similar events in the future. But we definitely take your feedback seriously, and we respond accordingly. So again, I thank everyone for participating, and I'm going to end the live portion of this since we don't have any more questions from the audience. All right.